NBA fans, welcome back to the 6-year Stint NBA podcast. We are your co-hosts. My name is Sean Tomesi.
I'm Jordan McDonald.
Lots of rumors, lots of weird stuff going around the league that is happening off the court. So the Sacramento Kings, which we love to talk about, the historically horrible, awful, mismanaged franchise, they are currently heating up the trade talks for their franchise
for more than one reason, too. There's DeMarcus, but DeMarcus Cousins, there have been rumors floating around now that he could be traded as early as December.
Right.
When in December is unsure, but if they're saying as soon as December, I would assume within like the first 2 weeks of December. And then on top of that, their 6th overall pick from 2015, Willie Cauley-Stein, has also asked to be traded out of the organization. No surprise there.
Right.
One of the main reasons Willie Cauley-Stein wants out that I read is that he feels like he's not getting a big enough role. He feels like he is a talented young man, and he wants the opportunity to be on the floor. Mm-hmm. And in Sacramento, he feels he's not receiving that opportunity. And I fully agree with him. When the Kings made this pick, it really didn't make sense to me. I mean, you already had DeMarcus Cousins. You had a plethora of young bigs. I mean, you have the... you brought in Scalabissiere. You already had Costa Koufos. And then you brought in Willie Cauley-Stein with DeMarcus Cousins. It seems really crowded up there.
Right.
And considering, too, that Willie Cauley-Stein really should be playing center, not power forward, considering he's 7 feet tall. He definitely has a more of a down low type of game to him. Doesn't seem like one to be out on the floor taking jumpers or anything like that. So
right.
He's requested a trade, but the biggest one is probably DeMarcus Cousins for sure.
Well, you brought up that it was a bad pick in the draft for Willie Cauley-Stein. I mean, he's 6th overall in the 2015 draft, which is shaping out to be one of the most powerful drafts of the last decade. I mean, 6th overall, you could have taken just a few players left on the board at that point. Emmanuel Mudiay, who's been kind of shaky up and down in Denver, but Stanley Johnson, who looks like a solid all-around wing that the Kings have always really been trying to get the last however long they've been trying to draft players in the lottery. It seems like forever. Miles Turner, another big man who arguably has had a much better career so far than Cauley-Stein. Justice Winslow, Trey Lyles, who's been magnificent off the bench in Utah. Devin Booker, who looks like a future all-star right now. The list just goes on. There's a lot of, even Bobby Portis in the late first round, arguably. Larry Nance. These players all could have been taken
and at a time,
better.
Too, I hate to interrupt, but at a time, too, when Sacramento, really, it's funny, the only thing you really didn't need was a big man. I mean, you had DeMarcus Cousins, and there had already been rumors prior to the draft that he was going to be traded, and when Willie Cauley-Stein was selected, I think it was pretty much unanimous around the league. Everyone thought, okay, well, here comes the Boogie trade. Where's he going? And it never happened. And we were all just kind of waiting around, and it never happened. And now here you are. And Emmanuel Mudiay, that was a point in time where you weren't sure if Rondo was coming back. You had Darren Collison, but I believe it was at that point when people weren't sure if he was like beating his girlfriend or something like that. Like, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember if it was this offseason or last offseason, he was facing some criminal charges off of the court.
Right.
So you had the uncertainty at the point guard position, and you turn around and draft a guy that plays the position, the same position as your best player. So really a head scratcher there. And then what were you mentioning as well about Cauley-Stein? I mentioned that he didn't feel he was getting the minutes. He wanted a bigger role, but there was something else you had mentioned.
Well, I mean, to talk about Willie Cauley-Stein, there's a lot to say. I mean, the guy, very raw, always had that label put on him. When he was a freshman in Kentucky, I think he was a freshman the same year as Nerlens Noel, and I assumed he was also going to go one and done. And he looked, I mean, next to Nerlens Noel, who was extremely raw himself, Cauley Stein just looked like he learned how to play basketball yesterday. And the guy went back to Kentucky actually twice. So he ended up staying till his junior year. And not until his last year there did he really kind of start to actually show any kind of promise as someone who could stay in the league. So, in his junior year, he seemed to show a little bit more promise, but he's never really had the fundamentals down. We look at successful big men in the league, and very rarely do we see guys that don't have those simple fundamentals down. The guy obviously cannot score on his own unless it's a lob. Which is fine. We've seen guys like Tyson Chandler and whatnot succeed from that, but he cannot pass the ball. He doesn't have any of those fundamentals down, and he can't dribble. So he can't create his own shots. He can't really facilitate an offense. He can't even really be in an emotion offense. The problem is he's really only a defensive player at this point, and what could be a worse situation to be in if you're a raw player who needs to learn fundamentals than the Sacramento Kings? And unfortunately, he's been wasted here. I don't think that he needs to leave the league. I think that Cauley Stein is certainly a player I would love to have on my roster, preferably on the bench at this point. But I think the guy is ready for a new situation. I think it's a bad fit. Doesn't make sense. And the fact that they're playing Costa Koufos, who is 100% maxed out, we know exactly what Costa Koufos is. He's like a Cole Aldrich, not to just throw another white guy comparison, but seriously, just an average center who's not going to do really much at all. So I don't know why a guy like that is getting more minutes in a rebuilding franchise that's clearly not looking, that's clearly not in the playoff picture. Why are you sacrificing young player minutes for someone who doesn't really, need any more minutes? Doesn't make sense. And, the thing that's really gone south in Sacramento for Cauley Stein is that he feels like he's being micromanaged. And we use that term for a lot of different things. But in this case, it's kind of like, you got a guy who's really raw and needs like a Luke Walton or like a really good coach that can relate to young players and get them motivated. And sometimes... even when you're a non-established player who's trying to learn some moves, it's not always good to just always focus on what you're doing wrong. Sometimes you need someone to tell you that you're doing something right, and that motivates you to kind of grow and learn. When you're just being told that everything you're doing is wrong and you're getting pulled out of games because you're fouling too much, which is something that young big men do all the time, you're going to have a bad morale. And that's what's happened in Sacramento. And I'm not sure if that's Dave Yeager or if that's just kind of the organization telling Yeager what to do, sort of.
There's been bad morale in Sacramento for the last 15 years.
Of course, we all know that all too well. But the point being is that he's kind of, like he said, he feels like he's looking over his shoulder when he's in the game on the floor because he's just scared to be pulled out of the game.
Yeah, and I'm not a coach. I've never played basketball really at a highly competitive level.
Right.
But still, in most sports, you don't want to feel afraid to make mistakes. I think the part of learning in life is making mistakes and learning from them. So to constantly feel like making a mistake is going to get you pulled from the game or you're going to be punished for it, that's no way to learn how to play basketball. And that could be one of the reasons why Sacramento has such a problem growing these players, as if that's sort of the way that they're trying to, if that's sort of what they're instilling in their players, is that you shouldn't make any mistakes or you'll be punished for them. I mean, maybe Boogie just kind of said, whatever, I'm going to do what I want.
Mm-hmm.
Then that could be different, but that's never a good feeling. And I guess just to quickly finish up the Kings rumors here, no surprise Cousins wants out. I'm surprised it took this long. If you look at the history since DeMarcus Cousins has been there, the They have not made the playoffs since he's been there. They've had a losing record every single year.
Yeah, they're currently 4-7 right now.
And since Boogie has been drafted, the only player that is still on the team since Boogie's been drafted is Ben McLemore, Willie Cauley-Stein, and Marquise Chris. You have Bismack, who's not there anymore. Isaiah Thomas is not there anymore. Thomas Robinson is not on the team. Nick Stauskas isn't on the team. Ray McCallum Jr., I believe he is with the Spurs. So just a lot of players in the last 5 to 6 years that have been taken, all in the high picks. DeMarcus was 5th, Bismack was 7th, Thomas Robinson was 5th, and then you have 7, 8, 6, and 8. So what it looks like here is just you're not trying to be better, but you're also really not tanking the way other teams are tanking. You're just settling.
Right.
And all their picks, I mean, are either not on the team or are busts. Ben McLemore hasn't done anything. Nick Stauskas barely played. He played, what, one full season before he was traded?
Yeah.
Isaiah Thomas is a potential all-star on the Boston Celtics right now. Bismack got paid and was a huge part of the Raptors' success.
Right. And I'd like to add, I think the only reason McLemore has actually managed to stay in Sacramento since 2013 is solely only because he's managed to actually hit it off with Boogie. They are kind of like buddies, and you can see it. They get along very well. They hang out off the court. So that's probably the only reason he's still there. His production certainly is not what's keeping him in Sacramento or in the league for that matter.
But too, you see a spike besides guys like Nick Stauskas and Thomas Robinson too. Once they leave Sacramento, you see a jump in their production, specifically Bismack Biyombo and Isaiah Thomas. Just huge jumps in their numbers once they've left. So
right,
there's got to be something going on. And then even before Boogie came, I mean, they had the 4th pick. They took Tyreek. Great rookie year. Where is he now? Injury prone on the Pelicans.
Yeah.
Omri Caspi is still on the team. But besides that, a lot of these guys end up making their way out, and eventually they either retire or they're on the bench somewhere or they're in China.
Right.
Really sad to see.
Yeah, Caspi is also kind of, we didn't mention, he's been in some rumors. The other night he was reportedly requesting a trade because his minutes have been sliced in half from last season. If I'm not mistaken, he was playing about 30 minutes per game last year, now only about 16. So obviously he's frustrated. His numbers, minutes aside, I mean, his points per game have gone down. They've been cut into quarters. So he's just terrible now. And obviously he denied the rumors, but as we tweeted, it wouldn't be the first time that the Kings denied rumors that ended up being very true. Sorry for the trouble you went through, George Karl. You're not as bad as Sacramento painted you to be. Just to wrap up here, where do we... It's hard to kind of say where can Boogie fit. It doesn't really seem like there's a huge demand for him, despite him being such a great player.
Well, I think
it's because of the attitude,
think the Kings. Right? Yeah, I really think the Kings have ruined Boogie, and I hate to say that, but that's what it is. I don't think Boogie is. He's definitely not a bad basketball player. He's very talented. Brings a lot to the table, especially offensively.
Yeah.
I just think that he's been given a bad rap. I mean, if I played in Sacramento, I'd probably be an asshole too.
But what teams do you think would he fit on? Who could actually be kind of like a player for, like, who's in contention of kind of, what's a team that could maybe use a player like that and maybe could move some pieces? It's hard to think of one.
I mean, when I heard the rumor, I went on Bleacher Report and I went on a few sites and I was looking around to sort of see what teams other people had come up with. When it comes to mind, I mean, maybe this is just because they're the Canadian team, but the Raptors, I think, could be in a position to maybe acquire him. If they're in a win-now mode, I don't really think you should wait for Valanciunas. I think that you should maybe move him, right? See what you can do. Be aggressive. I mean, you brought in Rudy Gay and you thought that was going to be a difference. You realized you didn't need him. Well, maybe DeMarcus Cousins is what we need to put us over that step. Portland, I think, could potentially be another position, but I don't know if you want to mess with the chemistry. I only say that really because that you're bringing in someone who I think could fit with Damian Lillard. You think of a pick and roll, a pick and pop situation, spreading the floor for guys like McCollum and Damian Lillard as well. And you can't tell me that they don't have the assets to move players and picks for a guy like DeMarcus Cousins. I'm not saying it's working or they should do it. It's just that is potentially a team that I could see maybe taking a run at him. They don't really have a star center, but what they have right now seems to be working. They're sitting at 6-4. And they recently beat the Kings. Another one that I saw that I don't think works is someone said Philly. And I was immediately turned off because you're trading one big man for another, or you're trading Jalil and Nerlens Noel for DeMarcus Cousins. So now you have Willie Cauley-Stein, Jalil Okafor, and Nerlens Noel on the same team. I don't think that works very well. It's difficult. I definitely think the most realistic possibility is honestly probably for me, Portland and the Raptors. There might be a few other teams in the mix there. I don't see them going to the Lakers. That was a huge rumor the last couple of years, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Lakers are pretty happy with what they have, and I don't think they want to mess that up going forward.
Well, I mean, the Toronto one is obviously appealing to me as a Canadian, but I'm not sure if that is a great move just because. I mean, Lowry and DeRozan already are scoring a bunch, and their biggest problem is kind of feeding the ball to everyone else and kind of making other people into a threat so that defenses have to respect the rest of the players. Damari Carroll hasn't managed to do that since he's joined. Jonas Valanciunas hasn't managed to stay healthy. But, I mean, it's and then Patterson hasn't really hit his shots, so that could be good. But at the same time, I'm not sure Boogie would ever really get the ball because not only are Lowry and DeRozan an extremely shoot-first backcourt, but there's no ball movement in the Raptors' offense, so no one would be passing Boogie the ball. So he would be probably really pissed off on day one there, and I'm not sure Masai would really want that. And then as for Portland, it's almost the opposite. Portland has so much ball movement. That's why Mason Plumlee works there so well. That's why Aminu and Harkless and all these guys that you wouldn't expect work really well because everyone's moving the ball. Everyone is knowing how to pass. Everyone's always open when there's a shot. No one shoots when they're covered except for Damian Lillard because he's allowed to. Everyone else gets wide open shots, and that's why they shoot such a high percentage. I'm not sure Boogie would really work there either. But then, I mean, Boston's been in the rumors. I'm not sure that works for the same reasons. I mean, they kind of have something good going there, and having someone like Boogie could ruin it. Well, they already have Al
Horford as well. They picked him up in free agency.
I guess the Boogie to Boston thing kind of deflated once they signed Al Horford. As for Willie Cauley-Stein, though, I just wanted to throw this out there because I was thinking about this the other day, just kind of to myself, and I realized, wouldn't Memphis be a great fit for Cauley-Stein if he can actually get it together? I mean, obviously, fits in right away with the grit and grind. I know that that's not everything, but you look at their front court right now. Marc Gasol is aging, but he's still going to be a part of this franchise going forward. Obviously, they wouldn't have re-signed Mike Conley if they didn't think Marc Gasol was there to stay, and Conley wouldn't have signed either. So I think Marc Gasol's there to stay. But Zach Randolph looks like he's on his way out. Not because he's going somewhere else, other than probably the golf course, because Zach Randolph is very close to retirement now. So
yes,
what the Grizzlies need to do, which they haven't done much ever, is exercise some experimentation. And I think bringing in a guy like Cauley-Stein would be great. I know people are going to say, well, why is that any different than Sacramento? He's just right behind a center who's not going to give up any minutes. Well, Because Marc Gasol can still defend his position, I think having Gasol at the 4, which I think could still work because Gasol is huge, but he's a very finessed player. He can, shoot the ball.
He's a lot like his brother.
Right.
Pau rarely played center. He played a lot of power forward, and it's just because of the way he plays.
So you could have a Cauley Stein at the 5 there. For 20 minutes a game, 25 minutes a game off the bench. Obviously, you don't need to. Well, you could start him. I mean, if you want to have that energy
if you developed
in your starting
him enough,
5. It depends, right? But that's a great fit, in my opinion.
Well, I definitely see how that would work. I mean, you have, and that I think that gives more freedom to Marc Gasol too, because now you just sort of have the guy who can be in there. He's not worried about. Marc Gasol doesn't have to worry about grabbing all of the rebounds, and I think that having both of them on the court at the same time would be sort of like an OKC where the Steven Adams and his Cantor work so well together, right? They're grabbing grabbing a higher percentage of the offensive rebounds. So I definitely agree in the aspect that I think that would work very well. That would be an interesting fit. How many minutes do you give him, right? Out of the gate? I mean, because he is very raw, and besides defense and rebounding, there isn't much to him. So would he hurt that sort of lineup? Would he sort of mess up some chemistry, or would he actually fit in well right off the bat? I also think that Memphis would be a lot more lenient with letting him make mistakes as well. They would definitely, I feel like they would probably just let him play, let him make his mistakes. And Marc Gasol is the Defensive Player of the Year. Definitely someone who you can't just sort of, look away from. He's had a great career. So to learn from a guy like Marc Gasol probably wouldn't be that bad either.
And I don't think Mike Conley would be too upset about having another person to kind of lob the ball to. I'm sure he would like that a lot because there's not a lot of athleticism in Memphis unless you look at their end of the bench players that are really trying to work their way up because last season they had so much playing time from all the injuries. But we've talked so much about the Kings. I think it's time to move on. We should talk about the Indiana Pacers and their superstar player Paul George being very discontent with the franchise's what the franchise has brought to the table so far this season. They are currently 5-6, which is not where they expected to be. And Paul George has been quoted saying that there's no trust, there's no chemistry, there's no belief, and that we're kind of just lifeless right now.
I saw that as well, and I was surprised to see that Indiana was struggling so much. I saw the what Paul George had said about how he feels there is nothing there to this team, which is surprising because when we did our preview, I sort of hopped on the bandwagon a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I looked at Indiana and the moves they made and a potential starting 5 and a potential bench unit. And I definitely thought that this team would not be 5-6 right now. Definitely underperforming, especially with Paul George leading the way. I mean, what is going on over there in Indiana? Clearly, as Paul George has stated, there is a lack of trust between teammates, and they just don't seem to be gelling. I wonder if Larry Bird is sort of sitting in his chair going, man, I wish I would have kept Frank Vogel. I really wish I had Frank Vogel right now to bring this team together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is it's an interesting turn of events over in Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, their pace they haven't been too bad. They've been in the top 10 or so in pace so far this season, but I mean, it's just it's odd, and no matter what he brings to the table, we're always going to look at Nate McMillan as a slow coach. Slow as in play style, not mentally slow. But
I understood what you said. Yeah, but it's probably for the best that you clarified.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah. But they've been off to a slow start. But I don't think that has really. I think people are reading into it too much. I mean, anytime you change your head point guard, especially on a team that's winning. And it's not a bad team like the Kings. The Kings can trade point guards every year, and it's not going to look like anything changed because they'll still suck. But the Pacers, who were good last year, they have to learn some new things, and they got really used to George Hill. And Jeff Teague is a totally different point guard, and bringing in Miles Turner into the starting lineup and really letting him become one of your star players, that's going to make a lot of difference. And, he's not the defensive player that Roy Hibbert was instinctively yet, but he's more of an offensive player, more of a rebounder. So they've got some adjustments to make. And I don't think we really know what Indiana is yet. And I don't think that we should be analyzing them a little too much. I think Paul George kind of screwed his own team over by making these comments because I think he spoke a little too soon, and I think he should have probably waited until they were about 20 games in if they were going to say something.
He is the best player too. If you feel your team is lacking chemistry and lacking morale, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's the coach's job too, but you're the superstar. You're the one getting paid.
Exactly.
Don't go to the media after 11 games and say that there's nothing there. Try and do something about it. Make a change. Also, just quickly before, I know you have a point to get to here, just quickly, their pace has gone up. It's actually been the highest it's been since the 2009-2010 season.
Wow.
It's been the highest it's been since Frank Vogel joined. Their pace, they're averaging roughly 98.2 possessions per 48 minutes. So, which is up from 96 in 2015-16 and up from 93 in 2014-2015. So, you're talking about pace and how they wanted to up the pace. Well, it's not a huge difference, but it's a difference.
Right. Well, I mean, they've been top 10 in deflections. They've been top 10 in contesting. They've been second, actually, in contesting three-point shots. And, I mean, their defense has been really good, so that's something that Indiana fans should definitely be proud of, definitely be happy about, because I think getting a defense right is probably the most important thing at the beginning of the season for a team like this. The pace will come, the scoring will come, and the familiarity, the offensive flow. I think that's the hardest part to get with a new team, and I think that's what really takes the most marinating to really get. And I think they are not done with this roster. I think, I don't think anybody thinks that they're a contender right now. I certainly think they're one of the better teams in the East, but, on paper at least.
They just have a lot. I feel like they have a lot to figure out.
They do. And Monte Ellis has been in a lot of trade rumors now because, it doesn't really seem like he's a permanent option at the 2 there.
For them,
maybe, yeah.
I think scoring isn't that big of an issue. They're averaging about 107 points per game. It's defense. They're allowing almost 110 points per game, which for a team that really likes to really takes pride in their defense. Paul George, I know, is a great defensive player. I believe that number has to come down a bit. And you want to talk about why they're 5-6? They're 5-1 at home, and they're 0-5 on the road. They have not won a road game this season. If they would have played all 11 games at home, they'd be 10-1. If you're looking at they'd be 9-2. I guess you could say, if you're looking at sort of the numbers there, right? So that's a huge issue. The Pacers are really struggling on the road this year. That is something that they're going to have to figure out, or it's going to be a long, long, long season in Indiana.
Exactly. And I mean, you look at who are the sort of top scorers in the league right now. DeMar DeRozan, James Harden, guys like Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, they're all wing players that can really put up a lot of points. And when your starting shooting guard is one of the worst defenders in the NBA for a starter, that's obviously going to be why you're allowing so many points per game. So at a position where, traditionally there's a lot of scoring, you want to have someone who can also defend his own position. And because you don't have someone in the background either who's really going to step up. I mean, Rodney Stuckey's a decent player. Jeff Teague is a good defender as well, but that's not enough to kind of make up for Monte Ellis as a liability. So they got to figure that out. And they let Solomon Hill go to the Pelicans, so they've lost a couple wing defenders there. So they definitely need to recover and get some more help for Paul George.
For sure. Seems a lot of players are in the rumor mill this year, and it's so hard to judge the rumors, especially because we're only 11 games in.
I mean, Klay Thompson was in a rumor.
I was just about to bring that up. I was gonna say you can't really take anything too seriously when when they're talking about Klay Thompson being traded to Boston.
Yeah, not a chance.
I mean, apparently every player in the NBA is going to be traded to Boston. So
I think Avery Bradley has something to say about that.
Well, considering he has 4 double-doubles this season, and in the last, 4 years, he's only had 2 of them or something like that.
Yeah. He's been a great player
He's been balling lately, so, who needs Klay Thompson? You have Avery Bradley, who's arguably a better defensive player than Klay, and seems to be holding his own offensively.
Right. No, yeah, I mean, we can just squash that right away. But, we can tell... sort of what is BS and what's not, just because, the BS rumors are usually the ones that never would have come up in a conversation before, and then all of a sudden they're just, a top headline. The ones that are usually have some truth to them are ones that we've been thinking about for quite a while. I mean, teams don't just trade players because of, an idea that popped in their head this morning. It's something that kind of lingers. I mean, And so, but yeah, I think this is, when the rumors are going to start, and nothing's really going to happen until probably February when the trade deadline is. And that's really the shitty part about the NBA, the beginning of the NBA season, the first half, is that there's all these rumors, but there's never any substance. There's never any actual trades until the deadline. So, I mean, and then as soon as the deadline happens, everyone's just waiting for the playoffs. So that's kind of unfortunate, but... Oh, well. Moving on, I think we should talk about this a little. LeBron James and Phil Jackson, 2 of the biggest names in basketball of all time, are apparently feuding because of something that Phil Jackson wrote in a book almost 13 years ago. I'm not really sure why this is relevant today. Apparently, Phil Jackson wrote... This is the direct quote. It had
the posse.
Sorry, no, that's not the right quote. My bad. Well, the point is, long story short, Phil Jackson basically was rambling about how players. Here's the quote: "In the Cleveland game, I was impressed with LeBron James, who has made strides since we played the Cavs during the exhibition season. Yet, as talented as the kid definitely appears to be." And for listeners, this was in 2004, so when LeBron James was a rookie or sophomore. He said, "I don't believe he or any 19-year-old should be playing in the NBA. These young men grow so dependent on their posses who fetch their cars and their girls that they can't possibly develop into mature, self-sufficient human beings. One day, I'm convinced we'll find out the true extent of the psychological damage that's being caused." And that was Phil Jackson in his book called The Last Season. So, and then because of this quote, Maverick Carter, who's affiliated with LeBron James, tweeted a screenshot of the definition of the word posse, which is a body of men typically armed, summoned by a sheriff to enforce the law, or a body of men who's, just kind of hanging out. Other words, a gang. And he tweeted saying, "All the hard work, effort, and achievement by LeBron James, and Phil Jackson still calls us a posse. Just shows that every step you take, they remind you that you're ghetto." So, I mean, obviously this has like a racial connotation to it. And, I think people need to remember that this, Phil Jackson's not a racist. If
No.
anything, this is a disrespectful comment,
And
but
I'm
it is
sure
not
that,
a racial one.
No, and I'm sure that this is being brought up now because of all this crap, like Trump is president,
Yeah,
and this and
exactly.
that. So every
LeBron
white
endorsed
person,
Hillary Clinton as well, so that's why he's
yeah.
kind of in
So
the
now
political
every
talks.
white person that has ever potentially made what may be a racist comment is going to be blown out of proportion.
Right.
I mean, what he said, is it disrespectful? Yes. Is it racist? I mean, no, not really. I don't think so. If you wanted to, you could probably put that spin on it. I think for LeBron, I don't think he took it as a racist thing. I think he took it as a form of disrespect that, he's worked very hard to get to where he is. I think every person that grows up in some type of poverty or in a low income situation always has the potential to be sucked into that sort of lifestyle of the way to make money without having to go to a job. You can have whatever you want. The potential for how it's portrayed in shows and TV. So for LeBron who's probably worked his whole life at making sure he stays away from that, staying focused on what's important to him, for Phil Jackson to turn around and say that LeBron is surrounding himself with or LeBron's has a posse, right?
Yeah.
That's probably the why he took it as so disrespectful, is because LeBron probably had to work very hard to stay away from that and to make sure that he was surrounding himself with good people that weren't going to take advantage of him or make stupid decisions. So to me, it's more of a LeBron feels disrespected than a racist comment.
I think one thing we forget is LeBron James didn't have a dad growing up, and he was under the microscope from like age 15. So he needed to have like that base and to have sort of people to lean on and people to trust other than just himself and maybe his agent. That's why guys usually get quote unquote posse, is because they need people that they can actually trust, people that they knew when they were kids before they were famous, so that you can make sure that you're not always around these leeches, people that just hang out with you because there's an incentive there. Guys that grew up in a tough situation definitely need a group of positive people around them. And I think having guys like Maverick Carter or Rich Paul around is what's wrong with that? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think more people should probably do that. It's about getting the right group of people. Obviously, there's a lot of bad cases where guys have negative influences around them, certainly. But I think it's not about the fact that you have a group of friends that are around you or a group of associates. It's about, are they qualified? Are they the right people? Are they going to get you what you need and where you need to be? And then as far as, LeBron's reaction, I whatever. I don't think this is as huge as it needs to be. Why is this being really brought up now? We talked about that, but I think, and you read the quote, and yeah, it's disrespectful. I totally think it is, but at the same time, it comes from a kind place. You know what I mean? Phil Jackson is really just concerned with the fact that 19-year-olds, as we always talk about this, should there be a one and done or more rule? In 2005, we changed the rule so that guys couldn't come from high school to the league. I think that's had a positive effect on the league. Some would argue it hasn't, but Phil Jackson was concerned, as most people are, and he just didn't word it properly, and he obviously shouldn't have. His rhetoric was a little bit disrespectful, but at the same time, it's coming from a place of concern. As someone who's been around the league as a coach, as a manager, as whatnot, everything, obviously it didn't have malicious intent. I think it just came out wrong. So
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I don't have much else to say on it.
Okay.
I think the more attention you bring to it, the worse it gets.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, maybe so. I mean, this is something we'll probably all forget in about a month. So
yeah, LeBron will win the title, and no one will say anything.
Yeah, and I also think this might have kind of blown up also because a lot of people are turning on Phil Jackson now because it's like year 3 or 4 now that he's in New York, and they still aren't really running the triangle, and he's still saying that they should, and it's just not really making sense. But
well,
whatever.
New York's a mess.
New York's a mess. We don't need to talk about that. So now that we kind of discussed all the rumors, there's a couple teams that we have noticed some things about. Did you want to bring up any of those teams, maybe?
Yeah, I think the first one that I wanted to sort of bring up was the Milwaukee Bucks. Just it's really interesting to see sort of how the growth of this team. I think that's the one thing, and specifically one player, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. And just sort of how crazy it is that the Bucks have they're 5-4 right now, sitting in the 6th spot, which is where we sort of predicted they would be.
Right.
But it's interesting to see that they've brought in these guys that are, expected to be game changers, to take them to the next level. You think of a guy like Greg Monroe, who is supposed to do that, who doesn't seem to be fitting in. He's in trade rumors. Jabari Parker was supposed to be the guy. But if you look at it, I mean, Jabari Parker has been he has been living up to what people have expected. We're 9 games in. He's averaging 19 points per game, 6 rebounds. Nothing wrong with that. And then you have Giannis, who at one point in the season was leading the Bucks in every statistical category, or in every major one that we've seen. And it's just crazy to see a guy that a lot of people thought was lanky and that wasn't going to do a lot really seems to be the focal point of Milwaukee, of this Bucks team, and sort of one of the reasons why everyone sort of seems to not want to play them. He seems to really fit in with this new breed of player that is just long and athletic and sort of all around. And they've been playing him. They wanted to be playing him at the point guard. I don't know if that's sort of still the scenario there, but you look at Giannis, who last season who ended up playing point guard for a majority of games, actually had better numbers. And now you see a guy like James Harden too, who's been asked to play point guard, and he's putting up unreal numbers. So the Bucks team is interesting. I really don't know why they're still sitting so low. They've made some moves in the offseason that I really thought would sort of put them over the edge, and especially with Jabari Parker and Giannis playing well, I'm having a sort of a hard time understanding why they're not really excelling. And I mean, they traded away Michael Carter-Williams to the Bulls. I still don't really understand that trade. But, right. I mean, that just made them longer. Tony Snell, 6'7", 217 pounds. This team just looks like it's ready to break out. And I'm just waiting for it to happen.
Right.
Is anything you want to bring up?
I mean, we call this team Team Length. And I'd like to point out that they currently are limiting their opponents as the number 1 team with the fewest opponents' second chance points. So they are allowing the least amount of second chance points for their opponents in the NBA right now. And that is directly because, 1, they can rebound because they're really fucking lanky.
Yeah.
And 2, they can defend because they're, again, very lengthy, but also they have a lot of scrappy guys, a lot of guys who value defense, and that's really a good thing. I mean, Jason Kidd should be very proud of that stat. I also think that they can improve in some other categories, like opponents' points off of turnovers. This is a young team, so they're getting
turnovers are expected.
Right, but that's something. These are all natural things. So I'm not too surprised. Like you said, we kind of expected the Bucks to be here at the beginning of the season, but yeah. So it seems like most of their statistical categories are on par with what we wanted.
I would like to
pretty
maybe
middle of the
see
pack.
them. Yeah, I'd like to maybe see them push the pace a little more. You
Yeah.
talk about having a younger team. They have their tech. If you're looking at the numbers, they're averaging roughly about 96 possessions per 48 minutes. I mean, the Indiana Pacers are getting more possessions than you. You look at
Yeah.
this team and you talk about how they're what you just said it, and it's the transition game. Like, this team is so
Yeah.
long. You think that they'd be able to get into the passing lanes when they're grabbing rebounds. You think that they would be able to push the ball. I feel like even though their pace is up from last season, I'd like to see it up even more. I really think that is something that could potentially benefit them. I think you look at this team and they're young. They want to get out. They let them out and run. I think that should maybe be up a little more. Looking at it as a fan, I mean, that's something that could maybe play a factor in it. I'd really like to see that number jump up a little bit more. I just think with how young they are and how long they are, they should be for how many rebounds they're grabbing. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that number should be a little higher. But
Well, and there's a reason why. I mean, there's no denying that Giannis Antetokounmpo is sort of the franchise cornerstone there. But Chris Middleton's. A lot of people say that he's sort of the heart and soul of that team, and not because he's got the biggest voice in the locker room, or maybe he does. I don't know, but it's because all the things that we know the Bucks for being. Middleton sort of embodies. So, we talk about playing defense, but being lengthy, but also sort of, shooting. I mean, maybe he doesn't embody what the Bucks are, but he certainly embodies what the Bucks want to be, which is a team that can shoot, which is something that they've improved on from last season. They've added some shooters, and he plays good, hard defense, and he's an underrated guy, and that's sort of, they can identify with that. And I think they're scoring 104 points per game. I think that number is going to go way up when Middleton's back and he's scoring like 20 points per game. And I don't think necessarily that he needs to take away a lot of shots from other guys like Jabari and Giannis and whoever else, because that's a guy, I mean, he doesn't need the ball. He's an off-the-ball scorer. So
yeah.
he's just going to cut and get open and do what like Kyle Korver does and all these kind of shooters do. And that's such a great addition to your team. That's why shooting is so important, because off-the-ball guys that can just kind of find their shot, J.J. Redick, Ray Allen, whatever, it's because those guys don't necessarily take away shots from anybody, right? They just kind of add scoring, usually, obviously not in a bad situation, but if it's done right, that's what happens. And their defense will go up. Their perimeter defense will go way up when he's in. And I think guys are just going to be able to hang back a little bit more, and their energy isn't going to be exasperated so much more because they'll have another star player. I mean, Chris Middleton is arguably the third or second best player on this team. So we're just kind of waiting for him to come back, and it's great that the Bucks haven't fallen apart in his absence.
Yeah, exactly. And not as severe as Indiana, but another team struggling on the road. They've only played 3 games on the road, but they're 1-2, only 1 win on the road. It's not a huge issue, I suppose.
Right.
But still, it's interesting to see a lot of these teams really struggling away from home court. It's early in the season, but again, with the same thing as Indiana, I feel like if that's not something you're going to adjust, could potentially be a problem in the future. Winning on the road is very, very important. If you can't win away from your home court, you're not going to get very far. So,
Yeah.
But they're young, so that's definitely something that they're going to work on. They play in Atlanta tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully they can pull out a road win. Giannis can pull off some of those Greek freak moves.
Yeah. Some other teams that have been nice. I mean, in the Western Conference, we've got the Utah Jazz that have really kind of stood out and been exciting.
And this was one of the teams that you were talking about in the preview that you wanted to look out for. You like what they did, sort of bringing in the veterans like Joe Johnson and Boris Diaw to go along with their younger players like Gordon Hayward and Derek Favors, Rudy Gobert, just sort of that veteran presence on that team. George Hill as well, involved in the trade. That was the trade, correct? George Hill went to Utah and Jeff Teague went to Indiana.
Exactly. And then Taurean Prince to the Hawks,
Yeah. So, Utah, very good defensively is what I've noticed. Only opponents' points per game, 93.8, which is that's a very good stat to have. But I mean, when you have Rudy Gobert locking down the middle there, you're not going to get a lot of guys wanting to come in the paint. I mean, the guy is 7'1", freakishly athletic, just unreal blocking machine down there in the paint.
Right, and I mean, one thing as well is that they have sort of started to really figure stuff out, and it feels like this team is one that's going to be around for a really long time. And I think they've got a good coach. Quinn Snyder, a lot of people don't know, he has, if I'm not mistaken, he has a business degree and a law degree. So the guy, very intelligent, could have had any job in the world and decided to be an NBA coach. So I definitely respect that a lot. I had no idea.
But, that's interesting.
He's a great coach.
Yeah. So Ty Corbin was there, 25-57 record. Schneider comes in, 38-44, 40-42, and now they're above 500. So,
and they look to be one of the better teams in the West.
Yeah, so definitely making an impact there is Mr. Snyder. And it's a noticeable one, too. Gradually, just you can see them becoming a better team. And I feel like the Utah hasn't really broken up sort of their main pieces. I mean, Alec Burks is still there, Rudy Gobert, Derek Favors, Gordon Hayward. I mean, these are guys that sort of have been there for a couple years. They've gone through the hard times together, and now they're ready. They're legitimate starters. Rudy Gobert sort of came out of nowhere for Utah. I don't really think a lot of people sort of expected him. I mean, he's not an all-star, but when you look back at it, I mean, I definitely wasn't expecting Rudy Gobert to be as impactful as he has been on this Utah team.
Yeah, I mean, Rudy Gobert has certainly been something to look at. He's shooting 56% from the floor. I mean, he's never going to be a big scorer, but I mean, I'd take him over guys like DeAndre Jordan, possibly, because honestly, the upside is there. And DeAndre Jordan, I think we kind of know what he is now at this point in his career. And while they're both kind of similar players, both very defensive-minded, I feel like Rudy Gobert is one that could work a lot better in a system. And, doesn't seem to have the same ego that maybe a DeAndre has. I mean, DeAndre certainly thinks he's a star now after getting all that attention.
He's better at free throws, too.
Certainly better at free throws.
62% from the free throw line, which is, for a big man, especially in today's day and age where it seems like a lot of big men can't shoot free throws anymore. I mean, 62% isn't amazing, but compared to what's out there, that's definitely nice to have when you have a big man that can hit 62% of his free throws.
Right, and I mean, that's been a really good late first-round pick in a terrible draft in 2013. I'm really surprised that they got such a valuable player in him there. Rodney Hood has been awesome, 17 points per game. I mean, how many threes is he shooting? He's shooting almost 6 threes a game, and he's shooting 41%. from three-point land. That's really good. He's got this crisp, textbook jumper. It's honestly so much fun to watch the Jazz. That's probably been one of my favorite teams lately to watch. They're just on another level as far as ball movement and excitement goes. And I think a lot of people expect them to be a fast-paced team, but they're actually very, very patient with their offense. For a Western Conference team, it's interesting because usually you associate kind of milking the shot clock with East Coast basketball, but they've kind of said, screw the labels. We're just going to do what we think works the best. And with a young roster, to milk the clock, that's a risky move because a lot of the times, playing at a fast pace can kind of mask the fact that you don't have a tremendous amount of talent. You just have a lot of athleticism. But in this case, it's worked out because they've got a lot of guys that have bought in, and they've got a lot of guys that are intelligent, and that's a great nucleus to have. I'd like to speak a little bit about their star player and Gordon Hayward, though. One thing I've kind of noticed watching the Jazz a little more than I usually do this season is that I was one of those people, very much so in the past few years, that kind of assumed that Gordon Hayward was just going to add, 3 or 4 more points per game to his stat line every single season until eventually he became an all-star. And I think while that might still be the case, technically, I don't think he's ever going to be that guy. I don't think a lot of people ask, is he the third best player on a championship squad? I mean, is he as good as like a Kevin Love or a Draymond Green? And the answer is no at this point. But can he be there? I'm not sure. And I think, here's the thing. Those that do watch the Jazz kind of understand that. And I think, people who live in Utah or people who are avid Utah Jazz fans probably really were fooled into thinking that Hayward was the second coming of their next, star player. But I think that's just not really who he is. And you see it in the way he plays. I mean, a lot of times he's standing kind of in that area. It's not the corner 3. It's not the top of the 3. It's sort of the angle. And he stands there a lot of the time and kind of just watches the offense play itself out. And maybe that's just the way that the Jazz play, and that's not his fault. But I don't like that from my star player. I want my star player kind of touching the ball more. And he seems to be more of an off-ball scorer. And I don't know if being an off-ball scorer is ever going to be the way that a superstar scores. I mean, it's very, very rare that we see that. Ray Allen was certainly that, but that's very rare. You have to be a really good shooter for that. You have to know your fundamentals really well. And I don't know if Gordon Hayward's on that level. And those who don't watch the Jazz, like myself a few years ago, kind of just see these stats and they say, 20 points per game. Okay, well, he's the next guy. Well, I think now we're seeing, a lot of players put up these crazy numbers in the points category, but it doesn't really translate. And it's because I think there's been a shift in the last few years where people have realized that just because you score doesn't mean you're the best player on the team. And I think, obviously, basketball heads working in the NBA and whatnot have always known that. But casual fans are kind of cluing into this now with the analytics movement. And I think it's important to note that just because a guy has, look at Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. The guy can score 20 points per game, but is he a star player? I don't know. And he's kind of, a liability in other areas. So you look at Gordon Hayward, and I'm just not so confident in him. And I feel like it's unfortunate that, Derek Favors hasn't really turned out to be who we wanted him to be. But I think it works. They play a Spurs kind of basketball, but even slower. And I think they've got some good going there. And I think they've got some time to figure it out. Maybe Rodney Hood or Rudy Gobert or even Trey Lyles, who I think has a lot of potential, will ascend into that number one role. And Gordon Hayward can certainly be the second best player on a team. I mean, if the Jazz become championship contenders, I would have no problem with Gordon Hayward having a Manu Ginobili type role or something like that, where he's obviously a good scorer, obviously not a terrible defender where you need to, have other people in. And he's a good rebounder. He's got 7 rebounds per game, and he's a good passer too. So he's kind of doing a little bit of everything. But I think people need to remember he's not your number one guy. And one thing he's got to work on this season is his three-point shooting, because he's only shooting 24% from the field or from the three-point line, and he's attempting 6 per game, more than even Rodney Hood. So he's got to work on his shot.
Yeah, for sure.
But other than that, I'm really happy with the Jazz. I love what I'm seeing, and I hope they, keep on this track, and I look forward to them. Honestly, I think next year they could be totally going to the conference finals. I think there's no doubt about it.
There's always that potential. I think it's nice to see the Jazz really having a good season. It's been a while. They've really been at the bottom for a while now, and I think it's nice to see that they've stuck it out, and they're finally having a good season. They have some good guys. They have a good coach, and I think they can only go higher from here. I mean, I don't see them slowing down anytime soon. They're relatively young. They have a good coach. I'm excited to see what Utah can bring to the table for the next couple of years.
Absolutely. I think that about wraps up today's episode. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can do so on iTunes and SoundCloud. Make sure that you share that with other basketball fans that you know, and make sure that you follow us on Twitter, where we're always updating you guys with things around the league, and also our own personal thoughts on things, and certainly links to our podcast whenever a new episode is up. So make sure that you follow us on there. You can also like us on Facebook. We have a page there, and just make sure that you tune into the 6-Year Stint podcast, and we're certainly going to be covering the league on a weekly or more basis for the whole season, and we look forward to seeing these teams we discussed and all the other 30 teams around the league, and we'll see what happens. Until next time, my name is Sean Temesi.
I'm Jordan McDonald.
Thanks for listening to the 6-Year Stint NBA podcast.
Thank you.